Cool. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome and good afternoon. And thank you for joining us virtually today. And we are now recording. My name is Claire Denson, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am thrilled to introduce you to today's event to celebrate Pride Month. We'll be hearing from Adesina Brown, reading from Where the Rain Cannot Reach, which released December 7th, 2021. Kathryn Lund, reading from The Things We Left Sleeping, which released May 10th, 2022, and Danny Freeman, reading from the UIC, which will be out next month on July 12th. All three authors' books can be purchased online. And of course, the books can be ordered on Atmosphere Press's website at atmospherepress.com/books. Please see the links in the chat. At the end of this event, we will have time for your questions. So throughout the event, if you have a question for our authors, go ahead and type in the chat and we'll make sure it gets asked. During the reading, please keep yourselves muted to keep extraneous sound at a minimum. In the meantime, though, do feel free to use the chat for praise and comments. And one last note, we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we'd love to read it. Feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com. And thank you again so much for tuning in and supporting Adesina, Kathryn, and Danny tonight. Let's get to it. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first reader, Adesina Brown. Adesina Brown, they, them, is a queer, non-binary author and poet who centers QT, POC in all their work. Their poetry has been previously published in Manola Review, Exposition Review, Rigorous Magazine, and more. Where the Rain Cannot Reach is their debut novel. To learn and read more, please visit adesinabrown.com. Adesina, take it away.
Awesome. That's a little chill group here. I love it. I'm so happy to see my loved ones. And it'll be cool to have this be out there for posterity's sake. I'm super happy to be starting everybody off. I'll just be reading from the second chapter and sort of skipping around. So just really chill and yeah, we'll have a good time. All right. So just getting started. They had been walking for 3.5 days before they arrived at Brasi, the waterfall-capped mountain between Myrta and Doman. From the lake at the base of the mountain, the Brasi River flowed out to meet the other, smaller rivers in its path toward the eastern Great Sea, passing through the fairy-ruled Ika Ika Mountains on the way. Brasi's location, so accessible from the coast and near fresh water, invited cross-racial, cross-cultural interaction. Now, the mountain was perhaps one of 2 known places in the world where all races coexisted, the second being law, though this coexistence was not always peaceful, with no governing bodies to regulate such peace. The mountain itself was ruled only by its economy, having little else to offer but trade and shelter. Of both, it had plenty. A winding path led up the western side of the mountain, up and up until, short of breath and physically fatigued, Ter, Shiana, Sila, and Alan finally reached the opening to a grand cave. Inside the vast open market, lit by torches and candles, elves kept booths next to dwarves, fairies and their fell children sold herbs and tinctures. Even humans, though far fewer in population, traded their crafts. Ter did not remember her life before Myrta, which meant she did not remember her parents nor her infancy in Sosoa. Her memory lacking, it was as though she had never seen another human. As such, her gaze lingered on her kin longer than anyone else in the market. Intrigued or stupefied, she did not know. After feeling betrayed by Shiana, Sila, and Alan, all of whom she considered family, the humans all around her provided a new definition. Accustomed to embracing what little family she had, Ter had never truly considered that kin could also include those who looked like her. Physical resemblance was something she did not share with Shiana, Sila, and Alan, and she had always understood that family was chosen. Family was those she cared for and who cared for her in turn. Family did not betray family. And yet, Ter watched as her small family wandered away, all distracted by a dwarf doing cheap card tricks at another booth. She did not follow them. She did not want to follow them. In fact, if she had it her way, she would have liked to disappear into the crowd around her and never return, which she privately admitted was a little bit melodramatic. Given the circumstances, she felt it warranted. Myrta was isolated and homogenous. Ter belonged to an even more insular and distinctive group within Myrta, and then, to make matters worse, Ter was the only human in the land. She was far too accustomed to singularity. Brasi then offered a whole new world of anonymity and freedom, both of which she had never experienced. As she scanned the market, looking for an out, if only temporary, Tara found an elderly human beckoning her over. Almost on instinct, she weaved her way through the dense crowd until finally she arrived at the jewelry stall. Long chain necklaces with clear gems, rings with massive crystals, and gold and silver cuffs were strewn about, with little attention paid to organization. Tara tore her eyes away from the chaos and met the older humans. Their eyes were just like hers, big, brown, and curious, with short eyelashes to boot. She had always felt her eyes to be rather abnormal in comparison to the elves of Myrta, whose eyes were narrower like Sila's. Her eyes also did not match Alan's, whose small and piercingly black, nor did they resemble Shiana's amber jewels. No, this human had her eyes. Tara grinned despite herself. The human stuck out their hand and said something that Tara did not recognize. Eso lo eso, soara eso ano. Tara furrowed her eyebrows. She did not recognize the language, so she figured that the older human was speaking Sosok, the official constructed language of Sosoa. Though Tara had never seen the gesture before, she took the human's hand in her own, if only to make her confusion less obvious. They frowned at Tara and repeated what she was still desperately trying to translate. She took a step back, embarrassment and fear coursing through her. Embarrassment because she did not know the language of her own kind, fear because she knew, in her lack of knowledge, she had inadvertently revealed herself to be unlike other humans. Perhaps Tara's family had been right to conceal certain information from her. She clearly was a little more irresponsible than she let herself believe. Still, her curiosity took precedence, and even if she had stayed with Shiana, Sila, and Alan, she knew she would have forced them over to this booth despite their likely protests. Tara wondered why the three had never taught her Sosok. The language was deeply rooted in human atrocities against all non-human kind, but it was also a tool for survival for any human, and especially a tool for the ever vulnerable Tara. If they were so worried for Tara's safety, why had they not prioritized her cultural and linguistic familiarity with her kind too? When they accepted the responsibility of a human child, why did they not also take on the responsibility of familiarizing themselves with human culture? Tara did not have time to feel the anger bubble back up within her before the human asked, "Nosok?" Tara nodded, one grateful that they had caught on. "Hello," they said with a smile. "I asked how you are, though perhaps a moment has passed. My name is Moss, and yours, little one?" Tara distantly noticed that the human did not introduce himself with their pronouns, so she assumed the Nosok neutral for them. When she introduced herself with a simple Tara, she realized that she too did not include her pronouns, though she had never minded how others referred to her. Instead of focusing on this minor detail, Tara found herself distracted by Moss's use of little one. In Tara's internal translation, the term closely resembled the Northern Elvish word Sitafe, which she had only ever heard in reference to a beloved relative. Her cheeks and ears warmed. Moss apparently found Tara's name hilarious. They put a hand on their robust belly and threw their head back, their long graying hair falling over their shoulders as they did so. Tara feared this would draw too much attention to the pair, but no one paid any mind to the hysterical older human and their customer. In Myrta, laughter always drew a crowd of curious elves. Tara found herself truly in a different world. Moss said when they realized Tara was not laughing with them, "No, little one, what's your chosen name?" "My..." Tara swallowed. She knew the more questions she asked, the more she revealed herself to be unlike other humans. Instead of revealing that she did not know what a chosen name was, she stopped herself and said, "Tara is my chosen name." Moss looked incredulous. They sarcastically said, "Yes, and Miss Omisia is my chosen name." Moss glanced over Tara's shoulder as if in search for her caretaker. She squared her shoulders and stood a little taller in hopes of seeming more capable. Moss recognized Tara's defensiveness, cleared their throat, and continued, "I'm joking. Just also so humans I know have chosen names, usually from the natural world. For instance, my grandchild's name is Opamas, boulder and Nosok, like the big rocks." "I know what a boulder is," Tara mumbled. Moss had most likely lived a whole life around other humans before their arrival in Nosoa, a life Tara would never truly experience, not like the rest of her kind. In Myrta, she had been an outsider, and even now with another human, she was still an outsider. Her heart clenched. She did not feel human, and that was the most frightening thought of all. If she was not human, what was she? Who was she? "Little one, I did not mean to insult you," Moss hummed. Their voice was like sugar dissolving in tea, or perhaps like a soft stream over a patch of moss. Tara relaxed a bit as they continued, and who knows, maybe things have changed since I lived down south. Without thinking, Tara blurted, "In Sosoa?" "Well, yes, that's where we're all from," Moss said as a fact, and it might as well have been fact. Humans were the only race living in Sosoa, and it had been that way for over 5 centuries at that point. More accurately, all contemporary humans had originated from Sosoa. All the land had once been free to all the races until the Domon War and the establishment of the land. With Sosoa came the swift imprisonment and genocide of all non-humans living south of the Dark Woods. To Ter's knowledge of Nosoa, there were no non-humans who had escaped the founding of Sosoa to tell the tales of the horrors committed. There were fewer still in Nosoa who had lived in that era to speak on the atrocities, save Primus Lania and the elders of Domon, or the eldest of fairies and elves who isolated themselves to law. By Ter's lifetime, it was a well-known fact that non-human races were not welcome in the human land. Though she knew she would one day have to return to Sosoa for some mysterious reason no one would explain to her, Ter had never felt any true desire to journey to the land. Having been raised by and having spent most of her life around non-humans, Ter was fearful of what such a homogenous culture would look and feel like, and at whose expense. Ter nodded as she thought, not sure how to respond. Moss seemed to understand Ter's unfamiliarity with human culture and thankfully offered a part of their life story without prompt. The older human said, I came to Brassy after my grandchild Boulder was born, maybe 20 years ago now. Once the first grandchild is born, grandparents are free of any responsibility to their children, parents now themselves. I decided I wanted to see more of the world, which of course came at a cost. One day I hope to return, but Moss shook their head after a moment of silent contemplation. Well, I'm sure you know that Sosoa has been a brutal world since its founding, and I do not wish to return there as it is now, though I have heard some hopeful whispers that this regime is nearing its end. Ter nearly gasped. Were the rebels so strong? There had been so little news of the Sosok revolution that had traveled to Myrta that Ter had almost thought it to be a hoax, and so then would her own role in that rebellion have been a falsity? Maybe it was less that she thought it was a rumor, but that she hoped it was a rumor. Nonetheless, she felt some degree of pride that the rebels were accomplishing their goals, estranged from them though she was. Pride that there was even talk that they could oust the most oppressive and violent regime the continent had ever seen. And somewhat selfishly, she was also glad to know that her abandonment to the Dark Woods had borne some fruit. All her childhood loneliness for freedom, for her kind's freedom, she supposed. With that, Moss continued on after they cleared their throat. Is there anything else I can help you with? You must be a very special child to be out here on your own. I'm not on my own, Ter quickly clarified, and I'm not a child, she wanted to say, but she knew that would have sounded childish. Either way, she wanted to protect herself, unsure of whether or not Moss was a Sosok spy or otherwise wished her ill. Even if she had remembered meeting any humans before Moss, Ter had been taught not to trust them, taught not to trust her very own blood. Moss hummed and nodded. After a moment of thought, they said, well, I don't mean to draw you from your party, but I do feel ill from the insult I have caused you. No insult unto mine, Ter said, but instantly regretted her Northern Elvish phrasing as Moss's face contorted in confusion. Clearly, this was not a common sentiment among the humans. Ter attempted to correct herself with a simple, it's no worry. Moss smiled and said, I would like to offer you a gift to express my grief and perhaps protect you in your journey. Before Ter could object, Moss pulled out a pendant of a broken crystal that had been pieced back together with gold. The pendant hung on a matching gold chain, and Ter's eyes widened as she looked between the pendant and Moss. The older human said, I hope you will accept this gift. You will accept this as a gift of gratitude for your forgiveness. Before Ter could accept the gift, Shiana had come up from behind and swatted the pendant out of Moss's hand. It hit the floor with the sound of broken glass, but Ter was relieved to see it intact. The crystal's resilience surprised her, though not enough to distract her from the shock at Shiana's actions. Why, she wondered, did conflict have to be Shiana's first instinct? The dwarf's voice was low and serious when she told Ter, do not accept gifts from humans. Skipping ahead in the chapter after that little tiff, Ter and Alan are in a inn inside Brassy. And Alan cleared his throat, yet again avoiding telling Ter something. After a few minutes of silence, he said, I know it is important to feel like you have found your kin. I hoped we could be that for you by default, but sometimes you need to look another being in the eyes and recognize them as you might recognize yourself. Ter, still facing the wall, glanced at Alan. He rustled around in his jacket pocket as he thought, and then added, perhaps I was not thinking clearly, but I went back to that human and retrieved the pendant for you. I wasn't able to get the chain from them as their prices were rather steep after our altercation, but the red crystal rested in his outstretched palm, the familiar gold lacing gleaming in the lantern light. Ter turned to him, transfixed on the object that had meant so much to her, yet caused so much strife. It reminded her of Myrta, where gifts were more than mere objects, where colors were more than simple perception. Red, she learned, was the color of independence and love. The crystal was so precious that she hesitated to take it from his hands, so she cradled her cold hands in her smaller palms. Finally, she took the crystal between her fingers and turned it into the light, savoring the warmth it garnered after a few moments in her possession. Not knowing what else to say, Tare smiled at Alan and bowed her head as she said, "Thank you." If you're worried about whatever Shiana and Sila were worried about, I took it to a fairy to get it cleansed as it can be, that is. That's important anyways, keeping stones cleansed. He returned the smile and tucked his chin to his chest. I hope we can someday prove ourselves to be kin again, despite our differences in blood and our disloyalty to you. Alan met her eyes when he added, though I want you to let me know if you ever need to be human.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I just love your world building so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And our next reader is Kathryn. Everyone can hear me? Cool. Kathryn Lund identifies as a queer environmentalist, feminist northerner, born in Lancashire and living in Yorkshire. The death of her mother from bile duct cancer and her own neurological disorder with its associated seizures and mental health problems are strong influences in her writing. They, along with the need to create a major project for her master's degree, form the starting point for The Things We Left Sleeping. Thanks to this project, she graduated with a distinction and the Blackwell Prize in Creative Writing. Kathryn has published a book of short stories titled The Things We Keep in the Cupboard. Kathryn, the stage is yours. And I will also screen share alongside your reading the pages.
Thank you. So thank you for tuning in to listen, everyone. So we're going to be hearing from my novel, The Things We Left Sleeping. And the reason that I'm sharing the pages with you is that it's a dual narrative story. It's one where you find your own way through it as the characters find their way out of grief and out of neurological incident. And I wanted to pick a part of the story tonight which sort of showed you how the book works, as well as introducing the two main characters. So in the book, there's two main characters, Evie, who occupies all of the left-hand pages, and she's really our protagonist. And then there's Stevie, who's her ex, and she's on the right-hand side. And it's two stories, it's two people trying to come together, but the narratives keep diverging and coming apart again. So I'm going to start off by reading some of Evie's narrative. Evie has had a seizure and woken up in a mindscape, which is like a farm. And that side of the book, until Evie can really get the narrative back, is sort of run by a strange narrator who we never really get to meet. And the narrator is trying to get Evie to start notebooking and to do a series of tasks which they have laid out in a notebook for her. So here we go, starting with Evie's narrative on the left-hand side, which is a notebook entry. Notebook. Task 1. Write out the route to the black barn. Blank space and nothing. Nothing. I exist and watch you breathing. I stand outside the pages, some fleck on the stratas of unfilled time, some dust fossilizing. How many days do you hug that notebook, doing nothing, nothing? Reagan is tired, she is in bed all day. Serge sits and stares at his toolbox, the ring keys rust up, the eyes closed drip. Nothing, nothing. I watch you and congeal hours onto the pages. I hate the notebook. We need the notebook. I pull it out from under your arms, solidified, sedimentary, coalesce. The colour outside in the farmyard begins to grey. The blue and the light is dirtied through. The blue house, black barn, the stables all start to hide away. I feel again the great white exhale of the unbound snow. I feel again your weight on me. Such a heavy freight, such a hard little rock that solidifies to close me out, like you can. I go and stand in the long barn door, as if you could keep me out, as if you could. I go and stand in the long barn door, and it starts to rain again, then sleet. So over on the right-hand side of the book, while that's happening on the farm, we have Stevie. And Stevie has journeyed down to where Evie is in hospital, and she is with Evie's dad, Dave, and she's trying to help him deal with the death of his wife and with Evie's illness. And she started doing that by having a major blitz on the house because she's decided it's just too untidy. So here we go with Stevie's side. Stevie, lunch. The clock in the back room struck 3. The table underneath it was sort of clear. Stevie plonked down the plates. They were water-specked and drippy. There was nothing to dry them on. Here we go. Dave looked at it all for a moment, then shook the knives and forks above his head. The water smeared, leaving them drier. The sound of the washing machine vibrated from the kitchen. They sat down. They wiggled, uncomfortable, facing each other. So, yeah. Can we just flick it on 2 pages, please, Claire? And the second one. And one more. That's it. I got you this. Dave pushed a packet towards her. You like stuff like that, right? Yeah, you've got me. Mussy for sushi. There were packets of sandwiches. The cellophane made thin, creaking noises as they were unwrapped. They unwrapped them. Is it me, or is this really, really awkward? Dave stopped, a sandwich up near his mouth. I don't want it to be. I know you and Evie are grown-ups. It's none of my business. You're right. Only she's the only business that I have left. He pressed his fingers into the bread of the sandwich. Stevie pressed at the sushi, prodded it with a fork, decided. Dave, do you know anything about this? This. She pushed her chair back from the table, tangling her legs for a moment. Evie's slippers scuffed a bit as Stevie hurried into the kitchen, came back with her handbag, handed Dave the collection of papers. They spread them out on the table between them. These are post-its. The washer is on. The washer is off. Doctor's Thursday. Ring Dad. Purse, keys, phone, eat. Are your shoes on? Do they match? Tell Dad you have lost the prescription. Yes, I know about it. She wrote everything down. It's helped, you know. She always was a list sort of person. It's not just that. I think it helped to write it out, to have it all down somewhere. They both looked down at the table, glad to move away from each other's faces. Stevie read the tight and wandering sentences in front of her, upside down to her, hard to untangle, jumbled. Then she wouldn't have to keep it in her head. I don't think she could. I got her a notebook so she could do it properly, keep things in order, write her way out of what was worrying her. But she wouldn't use it, said she didn't need it. I think she was starting to resent me helping her, needing my help all the time to do her bills, her money, her life. Awkwardness was an odd thing for Stevie. Awkward was a problem for other people. Dave, is there anything else, any other bills or stuff that needs sorting? His hands began to shake, revealing odd words beneath them, covering, revealing. Do not ring, get up, forget, awake, stay, Dave's head lifted. Stevie had no words for how badly, how loudly he cried, only her own cry, like a siren, pulling her towards rocks where she would drown. So I'm going to just move back over onto Evie's side to continue. I will not let this go. I erode like the sea, even the most strong of places. Lens cap closed to the world, solid as bedrock. I will beat you until my hands are dust. I will roll over the top of you until you're sound ground under the wave. You cry out, grab me. Fly up, boiling up, some rock of bird gone flesh, with wings of rock, with rings that beat, beat, beat. Come on, beat me back. Join me in these rolling places. I've rifled through your nervous system. I've come out through your hair. I hold you, pin you, fall into the dugout pits of the floor. You roll on top of me, frozen earth, rain, stone rain. I grab hold, I wrestle, I won't let go. I have the notebook. Let me make it clear to you. I am not going anywhere until you start the task in that notebook. You struggle beneath us, go still. still, but not gentle. I sit on the hump of you. You open and shut your eyes at me. I sit, I wait, quiet, come like a fire coughing on snowwood. We lay quiet at the bottom of this pit. The soil of the long bomb burns out cold around us, slips and rattles lonely grains into the rubble of this hole. Drop rock, you settle down on me, soil settles down on me, fragrant and cold. You shift and knock soil in the darkness. You slip the notebook up with your fingers. The pit is so cold, you press, bone cage down on top of me. You open the notebook, you start to write. Slow, cold, stiff little stick fingers. Finally, you start to write. Notebook, task 1, write out the rules to the black barn. When I came here with Stevie, it was so cold the nipples stuck out of her tank top like mountains. Bloody hell, said Stevie, wearing her orange glow sticks shoved end to end to make ironic shag bands, a blue one on her head like a frosted crown, a finger on each summit, first ones to climb the night. I've been smuggling. Toilsome mountain on plastic leatherette heels, waist to Stevie, her long legs, the strobe lighting sweeping, banging in blood vessels, giving out in dawn in the bloodlight, in ears deaf but for the lung drum beat, for the strange humming of rave bodies losing colours into the grey. The tall black barn behind, the spill of people, the music dying out into the night. Bloody hell, said Stevie, handing me her bright crown. Bloody hell. You close your eyes and breathe under the notebook. The pages underneath your head like a pillow, like a spill of thoughts out of a head wound, black and bleeding over the snow. I move the notebook away. I get into the blankets. I wrap my arms around the ribbed moving chest box of your lungs. I breathe again, with you, our bodies one rise and one fall. I lie down in the breath of you. Thank God, thank God. So you can see the two narratives sort of complement each other. What's going on in one is also happening in the other, but just from very different perspectives. And interspersed between it all are the actual medical notes of what's happening with Evie, a hospital note and her mental health records. And a lot of these are based on the sort of forms and activities and things that I was given myself when I was receiving mental health help. And if we go on to the next slide, hopefully, if there is one more, yeah. So you can see on the left-hand side there, on Evie's side, she's filling in her sort of homework that her therapist has sent her. And it says, in the box, write your task for this week. Set yourself what you would like to achieve and what you think you can achieve. This week, I would like to stop thinking that if I keep singing that tune, my memories won't disappear. This week, I will work towards this by, I will not sing it. I will not panic if I don't remember. I will think of the memory, not the pattern. This week, I have achieved this, yes or no? But the pattern was sunlight on long blonde hair. The pattern is a car travelling along the road. Summer, heat. You can smell heat. It's car fabric, cooked soil, dry grass, baked tarmac, cotton top, skin salt, hung air, petrol, burning metal on the door frames, heated plastic on the dash, heated everything, glass, summer in a car. This is how to remember it. This is how you get there. You remember it this way to a radio song. It sounds like a road with the windows open. Sounds like Stevie driving in the sun. Tastes like fruit, hot, sticky, running up and down the throat. Tastes like a day run on sun juice, a car run on songs. Come on, Evie, live a little. Are you sure we should be here? Fucking hell, we were here just the other night, remember? The rave, the glow sticks, the whistles. It's an abandoned farm. It's in the middle of effing nowhere. There's nobody here. Stevie yelling out of the car door, breaking the silence of the sun, the baking track, the solid time. Here, it were round here. Stevie, this place is trashed. I really don't think there'll be any fruit here. There's fruit if I say so. Will you come the fuck on? Stevie, the old garden, an old kitchen table dragged beneath the tree, too heavy to move outside for generations, beyond rotting in rain, beyond bleaching by sun. Left behind for Stevie to rock on, swaying with it slightly like a sailor out at sea. Stevie's shadow, the light between, some long forever of the stretched out still and sky. There, what did I fucking tell you? Stevie handing down peaches, bruised delicious, a ripe heart in a rough and funny fur. small, misshaped, oddly dark. Stevie sat on that table in its sea, their mouthful on peach stones in the lengthening grass. The sun going down slowly, bitten away by a distant horizon, the nearer outlines of porter cabins, JCBs, orange pegs. Next time we drive past, this place won't be here, just some motorway. Stevie, her long arms, her sweet smell. Here now, isn't it? Leave off, you'll bring me down. Stevie, the vanished sun, the tree above the figure, the smell of cooler evenings at the end of the day. Stevie, summer, and the sweet sea swamp tree. The pattern of the both of us. Don't let go. Thank you.
Wow. I mean, I just love how both sides, work alongside one another and together. It just makes me want like that physical copy for that tactile experience.
Yeah, it is a book which you need in actual physical print. So you can, like this bit where you have to reorientate the book and turn it round, and the narrative goes in the opposite directions, and some of the notes, because they run in between the narratives, it acts as like a buffer. So yeah, it is one where it's if you can read a physical copy, it's best in physical copy form. It's
like every physical book lover's dream,
I can't read on screen, so
Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for listening.
And our final author for the evening is Danny Freeman. Danny Freeman is a native Texan, born in Dallas and raised in Houston. He is a former elementary school teacher and intervention program coordinator for a large Texas school district. Danny now lives for a living and resides outside the Lone Star State in a happy spot somewhere between his head and his heart. He is busy writing his second novel. If there is an afterlife, he hopes he'll get assigned to a small cottage between his two favorite couples in the world, Wesley and Buttercup, and Alex and Brandon. The You I See is his first novel. Danny, take it away.
Whoops. Do I need to start again? Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for Adesina and Kat for sharing those two really interesting readings. I'm considered a great honor to be alongside two such wonderful authors. I want to share two different selections from my novel called The UIC. And the UIC is about two teenagers coming of age in Houston, Texas in the late 80s. They actually meet at the beginning of 7th grade. And Alex, who is the protagonist and first person narrator of the book, is 12 and Alex is 13, even though they're both Brandon is 13, even though they're both in 7th grade. So they meet at the beginning of 7th grade, and the first clip that I'm going to read comes from the following summer. So this would be the summer of 1988, when they've been friends for, about 8 or 9 months. The church youth group went to the same camp every summer in the 3rd week of July. Brandon had been the previous 2 summers. He never talked much about camp, other than to say who went out with whom, who dumped whom, and who scratched whom. When I asked him if I should go, he threatened great harm would come to me if I didn't. We sat together on the long ride to the hill country, where Camp Brazos Hills nestled amidst the rolling landscape between Austin and Llano. The rest of the church van was chaotic, but we somehow managed to stay in our own little cocoon, oblivious to the loud voices and strident laughing of the other junior high boys around us. Not long before we arrived, Brandon turned to the dreaded subject. Okay, you hottie, you're going to have to make some decisions. Rachel is still after you. You do know that. I nodded. Well, Christy told me that Anna and Jennifer both want to go out with you at camp too. I mean, there's going to be pressure. You'll have to make a decision. And then you don't even know who's going to be there from the other churches. Brandon caught me off guard. Back when we first became friends, he talked about dating at camp on a regular basis. I was always uncomfortable and a little discouraged because I never wanted to be with anyone but Brandon. I didn't notice it as it happened, but I eventually realized he brought up the topic less often as our friendship deepened in the winter and spring. He made a casual reference to Carrie, his girlfriend at camp the previous summer, one day in June, but he was otherwise silent about the prospect of dating any girls at camp. I suppose my subconscious thought the matter was dead and buried. I was dazed when he brought it up again. Something about summer camp drove all the sexually repressed church kids into a manic frenzy. Brandon told me about a girl from a church in Waco who actually kissed Joshua the previous summer. He said, "It makes me feel better for him, you know? We give him such a hard time. It's good to know he can get a girlfriend." Of course, only a girl from Waco would be likely to kiss Joshua. He shuddered, whether at the thought of Joshua kissing any girl or a girl from Waco pushing herself on Joshua, I could only wonder. We settled into our cabin in the late afternoon. Most of the boys in our cabin were from our church, but there were 6 boys from a church in Austin. Our cabin counselor, Jake, was a college student from Abilene. He seemed nice enough. It was his first time being a counselor at Camp Brazos Hills. Brandon cast a wicked glance my way when Jake said this. I asked him about it later. He said, "Those are the best kinds of counselors to have. They're like substitute teachers. You just tell them what happened last year and then do whatever you want." The first 2 days rolled by in a blur of activities. Early morning cold showers, dismal breakfasts, singing, lessons, group games, more singing, somewhat better lunches, kitchen cleanup duty, swimming, sports, canteen, free time, dinners with bizarre combinations like spaghetti and corn dogs, taco salad and fried catfish, more singing, the campfire, and late night cabin devotionals. Brandon had been right. In between all these activities, a flood of messages and notes got passed around. Couples united gleefully and parted bitterly with amazing speed, sometimes in the span of a meal or a round of singing. The couples who lasted more than a day or two garnered a fair amount of respect and awe. Brandon plunged into the fray on Monday morning. He somehow arranged, through the help of several intermediaries, to go out with Kathy, a girl from a church in Austin. She seemed nice enough. She trailed along after us all day Monday. I felt a bit sorry for her. She was definitely the odd person out in our lopsided threesome. After dinner on Monday, Brandon and I had a few minutes alone in the cabin. He had a plan. "Okay, my little stick-armed friend, your good looks and charm have the girls lined up and panting after you. And your hair, I swear, I've actually heard girls talking about your hair." He chuckled. I blushed. "Kathy has a friend from her church all lined up for you. You've probably seen her. She's the one with the curly brown hair." I sighed and rolled my eyes. "Oh, come on, Alex. You just ask her out. Her name is Sarah. She'll say yes. Half the girls, no, 3/4 of the girls, that's right, more? That's more, right? Are lusting after you. I mean, you could have your pick of the girls. Just ask Sarah out. Then when we 4 are together, they'll have each other for company, and it'll be like old times for us." He spoke of old times like it was years ago, not just the previous week. I continued to be confused and upset by Brandon's insistence about having a girlfriend. I had no interest in dating any girls at camp or anywhere else. I was happy to be with Brandon every waking second, and I thought he felt the same way. For the previous 10 months, he seemed to be happy to have me all to himself. He had rebuffed every guy in the youth group, not just Joshua, who tried to be a part of our little twosome. I never wanted it any other way. Then he suddenly wanted to pair me off with some girl who, sweet as she was, I didn't even want to be around. I was utterly baffled. I kissed a girl once at a school dance at the end of 6th grade, but that was a debacle and something I never wanted to repeat. Making a serious attempt to ask out a girl was virgin territory for me. Brandon assured me it was very simple, but I took some convincing. "Listen, Alex, you're making it so hard. You aren't asking her to marry you. You're not even asking her to be your friend. Sheesh. She's going to say yes to you no matter what you say. Even if you mess it all up and say you hate puppies, she'll say yes. It's like the best win-win situation ever." In the end, he wore down all my defenses. We walked back up the path from our cabin to the main clearing. Kathy had already prepared the scene. Sarah sat by herself on a bench near the dining hall. Brandon gave me a push and said, "Go get her, Tiger." The whole silly mess was over in seconds. Sarah seemed more excited than I expected. She took my hand and pulled me off the bench. I tried to wiggle my hand free, but she had a vice-like grip. Brandon and Kathy were waiting for us under a nearby tree. It was time for the evening activity in the east soccer field. The four of us began to make our way over. Brandon and Kathy walked slightly in front of Sarah and me. Sarah seemed to forget I was there as she and Kathy launched into a steady stream of gossip about the other girls who hadn't yet got their own boyfriend. She dropped my hand in the midst of much gesturing. I breathed a sigh of relief. I couldn't take my eyes off Brandon. I realized for the first time in some months how much he seemed to have grown since we met the previous September. I was with him all the time, but I saw him differently in that instant. He had on one of his usual tank tops, and I couldn't help but notice the rounded haft of his shoulders and the size of his rapidly growing triceps. I let my gaze drift down to his tight ass, and I admired his shapely calves. I went hard in seconds and wished the girls would just go away. Brandon let Kathy's hand slip from his, and as if on cue, the two girls caught up with one another. Brandon slowed his pace a fraction, and I caught up with him. He threw his arm over my shoulder and gave me the biggest grin possible. He winked and whispered, "See, I told you. The girls are all sorted, and we've still got each other. Inigo and Fezzik come out on top again." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to skip and shout. I wanted his arm around me like that all night. I wanted to hold my best friend's hand forever. This next section takes place about a month later after the boys are back from camp, just before school starts. Mrs. Marshall had to take Brandon to the dentist for a checkup and cleaning just after lunch that day. They left me alone on the deck. It was an impossibly sultry day in late August. I was miserable, even in the shade. I had just started The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and I couldn't wait to find out why it was such a shocker when it was published in 1926. I decided to go in and continue reading upstairs. I changed out of my sweaty clothes, cooled off under the ceiling fan, put on dry shorts, and stretched out on Brandon's bed. I looked up between chapters and caught sight of a stack of sketchbooks on Brandon's drawing table. He normally kept the table clear. He said he couldn't concentrate with clutter around him. He had a stash of old sketchbooks stacked in his closet, but never asked if I wanted to look through them. I stared at that stack of sketchbooks and wondered why he had brought them out. Did he plan to show me something? I considered if I should have a glance through them or leave them alone. Curiosity got the better of me, though I felt slightly uncomfortable. I walked over to the table and examined the cover of the top sketchbook. Brandon had dated it January 1st through February 25th, 1987. I looked at some of the other covers. All of them had dates of varying lengths, some spanning just a few weeks and others spanning many months. The books were not in any kind of order. This irked me, so I took a minute to arrange them chronologically. The first book started in March 1985. I began leafing through the sketchbooks. The beautiful sketches made me feel instantly connected to Brandon. His stunning style was as familiar to me as his voice, his cheeky grin, and his strong body. Somehow his sketches made me feel physically close to him. Something of him was in them. I marveled as I traced the development of his ability. The earliest sketches had a kind of childishness about them. They were still skillful and better than anything I could sketch. Yet even if the books had not been dated, I could have easily lined them up in chronological order just by noticing the command he gained over his skill and technique as the months and years flew by. I finally reached the last sketchbook, June 8th through August 5th, 1987. It was the one he had with him at camp. He must have filled up the last few pages in the days after camp. Even though we often sat side by side on our favorite swing when he sketched at camp, I knew better than to peek or ask to see. He kept them hidden until he was ready to share them. It dawned on me that he hadn't showed me a drawing in a long time, maybe a month or more. I was shocked when I opened the first book and saw the first page. I couldn't take in what I saw. It was me. I was on that first page, sitting by the side of the pool, head slightly turned to the viewer, with a cheeky smile and bright, happy eyes. I hadn't posed for that. I suppose he just saw me there in his mind's eye. It was exquisitely done. I flipped the page. I stared at myself again. This time I was sitting in my usual place on the deck, a copy of The Body in the Library in my hands. Across on the opposite page, I stood on the diving board, arms held aloft in a double bicep pose. He had sketched my arms very generously. It didn't take much to imagine the grin he had on his face as he did so. I flipped another page. I lay on his bed, my head propped up on a pillow, looking at the viewer. This was how we often lay on his bed when talking, bodies fully stretched out, our heads just inches apart on our pillows. As I continued to turn the pages, I saw myself in drawing after drawing. I saw myself as Brandon saw me. I was dizzy with wonder. My best friend had filled a book with sketches of me. It sparked a feeling in me I couldn't begin to describe, a sensation like flying or floating, an excitement that felt like falling in love, at least the kind of love that almost eighth graders could experience. Except that I had already fallen in love months before, from the moment I stood across from Brandon as he talked a mile a minute and wiped grape jelly off his shapely arm. Then I reconsidered. Perhaps this wasn't the feeling of me in love, but the first glimmer of hope that Brandon had fallen in love with me. Was that the overriding emotion I felt? The unexpected and impossibly wild hope that he might love me too, and in the way I loved him? I heard the rumble of the garage door below. I raced to set the sketchbooks back on the drawing table. Then I realized I'd left them in a neat chronological stack, the exact opposite of how I found them. I heard the back door open and slam shut. In a frenzied panic, I shuffled the books and left them in a haphazard stack, their spines at various angles. Brandon's pounding steps thundered up the stairs. Brandon shouted from the landing, "Where are you, oh best friend of mine? I'm just going to pee. I'm so ready to swim, and I'm going to drown your skinny ass." His laughter trailed off down the hall.
Thank you, Danny, so much. That was so lovely. I mean, I'm still going to be thinking about that idea of knowing someone by like going through their sketches and feeling close to them.
Yeah.
That, thank you so much for sharing. And everybody give all our authors a big round of applause if it's, silent applause. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes for our audience Q&A. So if you have a question, please go ahead and type it in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. And I have a question also just to kick it off. I was wondering, I guess for all of you, what was the most, fun part of the process of, creating this book, all of your books?
I think seeing the cover was really, I think because it looked like I hoped it would look like, but it looked nothing like I could think of myself. And it also made the whole thing seem quite real to have a cover. And I work in an art shop as well, so I took my cover and I'm like, it's good, isn't it? It is good. It's not just me that's like overly fond of it. It is good. And everyone at work was like, yeah, no, that's really good. So it was a fun bit as well, because it's something that's completely out of your control in a way. Once you've sort of said what you like and what you don't like and given your ideas, it's not something you can make yourself. It is something that comes from somebody else. It's somebody else interpreting your ideas. So it's one that you've got to let go of a little. You can't have that much control over it. So whereas the rest of the book, I was still I was probably driving you all mad. I was still sending in corrections like about a day before that I was meant to be doing, but with the cover I just had to let it go. So just to have that back, that was really good fun.
I think for me, I'm writing another book now, and I'm realizing that a part of Where the Rain Cannot Reach and the Domon's Despair trilogy that was really fun for me was making the constructed languages, because that took like a lot of time, but I was just really proud about how that turned out, and that was really fun. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm like, I can't believe that I had the motivation to do that in the first place. But I'm like reading it back even for this, I was like remembering the fun I had in that process. So that was definitely, one of my more favorite parts about it.
It's hard to pick just one thing, but I will sort of say, along with Kat, that it was really exciting, seeing the cover. That certainly did make it feel like, oh wow, this is actually a book now, and just to see how the cover really captured something that I wanted it to capture, that closeness, that youthfulness, and even sort of that sense of there's something nostalgic a little bit about the cover, which obviously a story that was set 30 years ago has that tinge of nostalgia to it. So yeah, I would definitely echo that too.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I love the covers and everything, so totally. I also wanted to know what you guys are reading now.
I honestly don't think I'm reading anything at the moment, because I find it, with fiction books, I have to read them all the way through in one go. So I start a book and I read it. So I tend to buy a lot of fact books, to be honest. We're going to Belfast for my birthday to the Titanic Museum, so quite a lot of fact books about the Titanic, like to a major level of sadness, things like the transcripts of the messages from the intership messages and things like that. So yeah, quite a ridiculous level of detail of Titanic fact books would be my preferred reading of the moment.
I've got 2 books going on at the moment. Actually, I just finished. I shouldn't say I've got 2 books, but I just finished this morning. It might be an author that Kat might know, but it's Nicole Upson. She's a writer. She writes mysteries, and they're actually based on the life of Josephine Tay, the British mystery or the Scottish mystery writer. And I just finished the one that's called Sorry for the Dead, which is the 6th or 7th one that she's written. And then I'm in the middle of a nonfiction book by Jerry Coyne called Why Evolution is True. So I usually have a fiction book and a nonfiction book, going at the same time. So
I am currently reading this We Want It All, an anthology of radical trans poetics. Fantastic stuff, very on theme for this reading. And the formatting in this, it's a poetry collection, a poetry anthology, and the formatting is just gorgeous. One of the most beautiful, beautiful poetry anthologies I've seen. So if you want, lots of trans poetry for Pride Month, pick it up.
Great recommendation. Thank you. Yeah, I just love knowing what great writers are reading, because it's always going to be something good and interesting. We have a question from Cam in the chat. This is for all of the authors. Sometimes we start a project with an idea of what it will be, and then it turns out to metamorph into something quite different. How did these books transform as you wrote them?
I keep going first. Is it all right that I keep going first? I'm just going to go first again.
Sure.
I think it became less personal. Like when I was writing this for my MA, it was a really, really personal project. It was a way of me taking the blank slate of my mind and taking a blank piece of paper and sort of morphing the two together, and really writing about some really difficult and really personal issues. But I don't know, when it sort of became a book that other people, well, obviously my lecturers read it and the adjudicators read it for my masters, but once it became a book that editors were reading and that other people were reading, it became something I could look at a lot more objectively, and it became less of a sort of personal manuscript and more of a public manuscript in a strange way. And it's a really subtle difference, but it became something where when the editors made suggestions, I was like, yeah, okay, that's a really good point, rather than me feeling it as like a personal, almost like a personal slight that I hadn't put something in. I was like, oh, okay, because it stopped being a conversation with myself, and it became a conversation with a lot of other people who were going to be reading the book. And yeah, it's interesting that you start off a conversation with yourself and really you are just writing for yourself, and then you hand it over and it becomes a dialogue. And I think for me, it was about it going from being pretty much, you know, a solo narration to it being a dialogue, which the whole book is. The whole book is a dialogue. So it was an interesting, that was an interesting metamorphosis for it to go through.
I think for me, I knew I wanted to tell a coming of age, coming out story in a slightly different way. But I think when I started, I didn't know exactly what that slightly different way was going to be. Um, and the more I kept thinking about other books in this genre that I had read, to me, the thing that seemed missing a lot of those, and this is not to put other books down, but just to say what I saw missing was the lack of exploration around sexual awakening. And that, you know, for a lot of teenagers who come to realize, you know, their sexual orientation is, you know, not the mainstream sexual orientation, it has a lot to do with their sexual awakening, you know, that those two things go hand in hand. And it seemed like that was something that is not explored in a lot of coming of age, coming out, you know, novels, at least the ones that I've read. And so, you know, so as I wrote more and more, I realized that, yeah, I really want to, you know, I want to put these two teenagers, you know, I want to explore that awakening. I don't want that to be the only thing that gets explored in the book. You know, I don't necessarily want that to be front and center, but I don't want that to be something that's left out, that somehow or another these two, you know, boys coming to understand their orientation was somehow separate from, you know, their awakening as sexual beings. And so so that was something that I didn't necessarily have a clear sense of when I started, but the more I wrote, I was like, yeah, this is important, and this is something that I want to try to explore.
I think I feel pretty similar to Daniel in the sense that, like, as I was writing it, I was sort of trying to figure out aspects of queerness and transness that are like traditionally underrepresented, especially in speculative fiction, where gender and sexuality are taken for granted a lot of the time and sort of assumed to operate the exact same way that it might on planet Earth, like in our Western like concepts. And so I think as I was writing it, at first, it was definitely like that was the intention, and it still is in all my writing. And then I was also realizing that like I originally came up with the idea for this story when I was like 11 or 12, like the base idea for it, like when I was really, really young. And when I reread it for the first time and even rereading it again recently, just realizing that a lot of what I put into this story was like what I had wanted to see at that time, like what type of stories I wanted represented, and like the sort of easeful integration of queer and trans identities into a world and a culture where, you know, that would be natural and free and like easy and not questioned, because we are already constantly questioned and under attack always. And I just wanted to give a little bit of refuge, I guess. So it sort of transformed from like that aspect, like the intention of being like, let me see what I can do a little bit differently than what we normally see around. And then also realizing that it was fulfilling something that I had always wanted to see in literature, and especially in speculative fiction.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So our last question of the evening, or depending on your time zone of the event, is from Eleanor, and they say, what lesson did you learn from writing your book about yourself as an individual or as an author?
I think what surprised me when I was writing the book, and as I got towards the ending of the book, was it's really the first time that I've written anything which revolves around my own sexual identity. Up until then, it's not really been something that I've either wanted to write about or felt the urge to write about. It's not been something that I've wanted to publicly explore, and definitely not put out there in a piece of writing. But it becomes very important to both characters in the book that they're truthful with themselves, and that they can't save somebody else in the book until they're happy with who they are as a person, and until they are accepting as who they are as a person. And I've never not been accepted as myself as a person, but it was interesting to me that it was in writing this book that I became comfortable with talking about it in a piece of fiction, and as part of my writing, and as part of the sort of more public face of myself, if that makes sense. So it stopped being something that was a thing that was between me and any partners that I had and my family. It became something that I was happy to talk about publicly, and to write about, and to share and explore. So I don't know if that's just because it was the right book for me to write about that, or if it was just the time of my life that I was happy to be sort of sharing those things publicly. But yeah, I wasn't expecting that when I started writing the book. I didn't set out to write, a book about two queer people. It just turned out that they were queer people. And then it was about, well, what do I want to then say as a queer person myself?
Yeah. I think for me, what I learned was, and this is going to sound maybe, I don't know the word. I'll just say that there were times when I was writing when I thought to myself, like, I wonder if I should be writing this. And a lot of that came from, my upbringing, where there was, a lot of shame around, my sexual orientation. And I realized that I didn't have to ask anybody for permission to write this book the way that I wanted to write it, and I guess, that sounds funny for a grown man to sort of say, like, I didn't have to ask anybody for permission. But, I think when you've been exposed to, a shaming message, you feel like you do need permission, or you have to check with someone, or there's someone watching over your shoulder or something, and so I think I learned about myself that, yeah, I actually have a voice, and I can tell this story, exactly the way that I want to tell it, and I don't have to get anybody's permission to tell it.
I'm really trying to think on this question, because there's so many things, I guess, that I learned in the process of writing it. And I think going into other projects after writing Where the Rain Cannot Reach, I think that it taught me really clearly that the only thing I need to do is write it. The only thing I need to do as an author, the only thing I need to prioritize is the actual writing and getting through that. And if I can stick to my my understanding of the world, and stay in alignment with my beliefs and everything, the only thing I really have to do is let the words flow out. So I think Where the Rain Cannot Reach gave me a lot of self-trust as an author, and as an individual in that way too. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was so great to hear, all three of you read from such different and unique titles, and to hear you talk about your writing processes. Thank you so much to Adesina, Kathryn, and Danny for your words and your brains and your generosity. And thank you everyone for being here with us to celebrate these fabulous authors. And don't forget to order Where the Rain Cannot Reach, The Things We Left Sleeping, and the UIC from the links in the chat. Please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, to sign up for our email newsletter, or to submit a book manuscript of your own. Feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and let us know that you attended today's event. We look forward to hearing from you. And that's it. Have an exciting and celebratory Pride Month, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.